Now, there's a renewed focus on the nation's property market this morning, with new figures suggesting that rents in most of the capital cities are, unfortunately, continuing to rise.
Only Perth and Darwin have seen falls as a result of the downturn in mining and resource sector. Andrew Wilson's a senior economist with the property website Domain, and he joins us now from Sydney. Good morning to you, and thanks for your time. Is this a surprise to you, looking at the numbers across Australia's major capital cities?
I think the big surprise in the data is that we're starting to see rent rises in the unit market. Now, we've certainly seen record numbers of unit approvals over the last 2 or 3 years, particularly in Melbourne and Sydney and in Brisbane too. But it's providing no relief for tenants, with rents now in units starting to rise. Now, of course, we've got the bulk of that new apartment supply coming through yet to hopefully impact rentals. But at the moment, rents are rising for houses and for units.
Now, for those people that don't pay close attention to these things, may own their own homes and be more interested in house prices generally, tell us about the building boom that's going on at the moment to try to supply and, I guess, alleviate this issue of high rent.
Look, we've had record apartment construction in most of the capital city markets over the last 2 or 3 years. It's part of what's been reviving the economy, particularly in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane. But look, there's no sign that that is alleviating what is a chronic shortage of rental properties. And I think what we're seeing is that tenants are being crowded out of the house rental market and are now pushing their way into the unit market. Now, we've still got a lot of supply to come through. Hopefully that'll moderate this mechanism, but at the moment rents are rising across the board except for the mining states, and look, it's really not a good news story for tenants.
Well, even Hobart going up there, I think it's one of the highest rises there. Were there any particular surprises among the cities?
Well, look, not really. It was the overall surprise was that unit rents are rising. We're still seeing weakness in rental growth in Darwin and Perth. Of course, that's the end of the mining boom. The fly-in, fly-out demand source there has pushed rents down.
Yeah.
But of course, rents rose very strongly in those capitals a couple of years ago. So those markets are now rebalancing. But look, it really does underscore that we have a chronic shortage of rental properties in this country, and we're getting lower supply from investors as well. So that both the demand is rising and supply is falling. So I'd expect rents to continue to rise.
Well, tell us what you think might happen in the next 12 months from what the data supplied to you now and the trends.
Well, the trend is certainly upwards, and I think there is upward pressure on rents. As I said before, perhaps the salvation was more units would have meant lower rental growth in units, but particularly in the Sydney market, we're seeing vacancy rates tighten across the board. In most capital city markets, vacancy rates are tightening, so there's no sign of relief in terms of rental growth going forward.
So where do people go?
Well, I don't know. Do they stay at home? But look, one of the other factors is that we have chronically low levels of first home buyers, and that's keeping pressure on the rental market. First home buyer activity in all states is below average, and the Sydney market is well below average, and of course that keeps demand for rental properties rising. We also have strong migration coming in to Sydney and Melbourne, and look, there's also a sense that a lot of the apartment sales that we are seeing to internationals are not actually going into the rental market.
Andrew, thanks very much for that broad sweep this morning. Plenty to think about for our viewers this morning.
Plenty to think about. Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, there certainly is. That's a really interesting last point that Andrew made as well, is that a lot of the investment that's going on in relation to those new units, if it's overseas investment, they're not necessarily being put into the rental market, so they're just lying empty.
Yeah.
Now, there are no penalties in place for that in Australia. There are in some other countries, and I hear in the UK in particular, but here there's not, where if as an investor you do that and then just sit on it and leave it empty, that accrues some sort of penalty. Here you can just do it.
Yeah, well, that sounds like it needs some sort of penalty,
doesn't it?
Because
some sort of incentive, yeah.
The discussion in the last few years is, okay, well, if the decision is if you can't afford to buy a new home or get into the market that way, then just rent.
Just rent, yeah.
Is this pincer movement that you occasionally talk about? You get caught in a pincer movement?